They say he was the last man to walk out of Red Rock alive. The rest, it's whispered, were either buried beneath it or cursed by what happened there. Some call it a massacre. Others won't even speak the name. But in the high, dry hills of Utah, where the wind whistles through sun-bleached bones and buzzards circle like lazy angels, the name Jonah Vane still stirs campfire stories and makes even hard men swallow quiet. He lived alone on a stretch of land so cracked and barren it looked as though God had forgotten it. A crooked sign, Vane Ranch, hung half-rotted at the gate, swinging in the desert wind like it was waiting for someone who'd never come. There were no cattle anymore, no chickens, no dogs. Just Jonah and the silence he wore like an old duster, dusty, heavy, and stitched with loss. Each morning, he'd rise before the sun, his boots scraping the floorboards of a house no one had entered in years. His hands, once quick enough to draw a six-shooter faster than thought, now moved slow and deliberate, feeding the one mule he hadn't sold and mending fences that didn't keep anything in or out. He spoke to no one, not even to himself. They died on a Tuesday. His wife, Clara, and their boy Eli had been on their way to the church in town. Jonah had taken the northern trail to chase down a stray steer. When the gang rode through, dust devils in human form, they didn't ask names. Just drew pistols and fire. The crossfire hit the wagon. Jonah came back to blood in the dust and a sun-hardened silence that screamed louder than any war cry. After the burying, he took his gun, a worn Colt with ivory grips Clara once gave him for Christmas, and walked it into his forge. No prayers, no tears, just fire. He melted it until the steel sagged and hissed like a wounded snake. Then he disappeared into the hills, his soul scorched hollow. Years passed. Seasons blurred together like smoke. His name faded from papers, from wanted posters, from memory. Only the wind seemed to remember. And then came the knock. It was late, the kind of night when thunder rolls low like a lion's growl and lightning paints the desert in ghost light. Jonah was in the barn, checking the lanterns and listening to the storm. He heard it once, soft, unsure. Then again, firmer. A knock on the big wooden barn door. He unlatched it slowly, shotgun resting at the crook of his arm, though he hadn't fired it in years. What met his eyes was something from a fevered dream. 10 girls. Young. None older than 15, none younger than 5. Mud on their faces, desperation in their eyes. Dressed in threadbare rags and soaked to the bone. A red-haired girl stepped forward, thin but standing tall. She had the kind of fire in her eyes that makes grown men think twice. She looked Jonah square in the face and said, "Can we stay?" He said nothing, just looked at them, then at the sky, then back again. He should have turned them away. Should have told them to move along, head to town, find help. But they weren't moving. They were barely standing. His breath caught when he saw the smallest one, the way she clutched her older sister's sleeve and tried to be brave, just like Eli had once. Jonah stepped aside. The barn smelled of dust and old hay. He gave them blankets, a pitcher of water, and a pan of stale cornbread he hadn't thrown out yet. They huddled together in the corner, whispering. But no one cried, not even the littlest. That kind of exhaustion goes beyond tears. He didn't ask where they came from. He didn't have to. Later, he found a torn orphanage emblem on one girl's collar, St. Agatha's. That place was 3 counties east. If they made it here on foot, it was a miracle. Or something worse had chased them this far. Rumors floated in from time to time. Bandits preying on supply wagons, raiders burning homesteads. He figured the stories were true now. These girls weren't just lost. They were survivors. He didn't sleep that night. Just sat on the porch, shotgun across his knees, staring into the dark. By morning, the storm had passed. The sun came up shy behind gray clouds, and the desert steamed like it was trying to breathe again. Jonah went to the barn with a tin of beans. Didn't say a word. Just set it down and turned to leave. That's when he felt a tug at his coat. He turned. It was the smallest girl, the one with chestnut curls and eyes too big for her face. In her little hands, she held something delicate, a flower made from twigs, bent nails, and a strip of linen. She looked up at him and smiled, shy but sure. "For you," she said. He took it. Didn't know what to say. Couldn't. even if he tried. Something cracked inside his chest. Not sharp, not loud, just a soft shift, like ice giving way to spring. He went back to the house, stood there for a long time, then unlocked the door. The air inside was stale with old grief. He opened windows, let the light in. That afternoon, he brought the girls into the house. No one spoke much. They didn't ask questions. He didn't offer explanations. But he cooked beans and boiled potatoes, and the oldest girl, Nora, she said her name was, found some soap and made the girls line up for a wash. She was a quiet general, that one. Strong jaw, fierce eyes. She'd seen too much, but carried it like a badge. At dinner, Jonah sat at the table's edge, while the girls ate. They whispered among themselves, giggled now and then. It was the first time laughter had touched the walls of that house in over a decade. Later that night, Jonah found himself standing at the fireplace. The flower sat on the mantel. He stared at it like it held some ancient wisdom he'd forgotten. Maybe it did. He turned toward the stairs. Behind him, the girls slept in rows of blankets. The house smelled of soap, bread, and something else. Something warm. Something alive. Jonah Vane didn't know what he'd done to deserve 10 starving girls knocking on his barn door that night. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. All he knew was that for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a beginning. The day stretched long and golden under the Utah sun, and for the first time in years, the ranch began to move like it had a heartbeat again. Dust still clung to the windows, and the wind still howled through broken slats in the barn walls. But laughter now echoed across the yard. It came in waves, shrill and bright, as the girls began to claim the land like it had always belonged to them. Nora organized them like a marshal laying down law, assigning chores, mending what could be salvaged, and treating the place like a fortress to be rebuilt. 2 of the older girls cleaned out the henhouse and fashioned a coop. Others hauled stones from the field, shaping the outline of a garden bed. The youngest ones gathered sticks for kindling and strung bits of twine between posts, pretending they were telegraph wires, carrying secret messages across the plains. Jonah watched them at first from the porch, pipe cold in his mouth, hat tipped low. He never said much. Didn't need to. His presence was steady, grounding, like an old tree the storm hadn't taken. But as the days unfurled, he found himself drawn in. He hammered nails where boards were loose, fixed the porch swing. When 8-year-old Miriam cried over a broken doll, Jonah surprised himself by sitting down, needle in hand, and sewing its arm back with thread he hadn't touched since Clara died. The girl beamed, eyes wide, and kissed his cheek before running off. They started calling him Mr. Vane. At first, it felt like a title carved from stone, distant, formal, but the way they said it, gentle, respectful, never afraid, it softened something in him. One morning, Nora stood at the corral, trying to bridle the mule. She was proud, that one, proud to the bone, but she'd never saddled anything in her life. Jonah walked over, took the reins gently, and showed her how to do it right. She nodded, watching every move, memorizing it like scripture. He didn't tell her, but it reminded him of the way Clara used to learn. Sharp eyes, fast hands. She'd been faster than him with a rifle back in the day. He could still see her ghost in the way Nora squinted at the horizon, like always expecting trouble. Trouble wasn't far. It came riding up the road on a pale horse, dragging dust and history behind it. A man with a gray beard and whiskey for blood, a drifter with sunburned eyes, and a face Jonah hadn't seen in over a decade. Deke. Jonah was fixing the windmill when the rider slumped off his horse, stumbled into the yard, and muttered, "I'll be damned." Jonah Vane. The girls froze, watching from the porch. Jonah said nothing, just narrowed his eyes, lowering the wrench in his hand like it weighed more than iron. Deke spat into the dirt, rubbed his cracked lips, and glanced at the house. You running an orphanage now." Jonah took a step forward. "What do you want?" "News. And a warning." He told it like a man trying to forget while he remembered. A gang, worse than buzzards, more like shadows, was riding hard from Firewater Creek. Called themselves the Ash Vultures now. Burned wagons, left no survivors. Deke seen them shoot a preacher's wife just for standing in the wrong doorway. Jonah's jaw clenched. The name rang too loud in his ears. Ash vultures. He'd ridden with them once, when he was young and angry, before he tried to leave that blood behind. Before Red Rock. They're asking for you, Deke said. Heard you were alive. Said they got unfinished business. He didn't stay long. Just drank a glass of water, tipped his hat to the girls, and rode off slow. Like he was escaping ghosts he couldn't outrun. That night, Jonah sat alone on the back steps, staring at the darkness. The sky above was heavy with stars, indifferent and cold. He lit a lantern, the same one he hadn't touched since Clara died. It flickered like a heartbeat fighting to keep going. He didn't see Nora slip into the cellar. Didn't hear the lock click. She found a trunk under the old grain sacks. Forced it open with a crowbar. Inside were the pieces he'd hidden from the world. A tarnished deputy badge, blackened with time. A revolver, warped and useless from the forge. And brittle newspaper clippings. Asterisk Red Rock burns. Vane vanishes after gunfight Slaughter Star. She read them all by lantern light, her face still but burning. When she came back up, she didn't yell. Just stood in the doorway of the kitchen, where Jonah sat with black coffee in hand. You were a lawman? She asked, voice steady. Jonah looked at her. No denial, no evasion. Once. You rode with them? I tried to stop them, he said, voice gravel low. But I was too late. Nora stepped closer. So were we. Too late to save Sister Clara. Too late to warn the wagon. But we're still breathing. They stood in silence, words hanging in the air like smoke. Then she nodded, turned, and left the room. The next morning, Jonah sent a telegraph from town to a church-run orphanage in Colorado. Arrangements made. Supplies gathered. Departure set for a week. He told the girls over supper. He expected tears. Expected pleading. But Nora stood up first, chin high. We're not going, she said. Jonah didn't argue. He just waited. We're not a burden, she added. We're a chance. For you. For this place. For us. The others nodded, one by one. Even little Sarah, who hadn't spoken much since the night they arrived, whispered, Home. Jonah felt his chest tighten again. That soft shift. Like something long buried turning over in the dirt. He didn't send the second telegraph. 3 days later, the rider came. Dust rose behind him like a funeral train. He didn't stop at the gate, just rode straight to the porch, swinging down with a snake's grace. Long coat. Scars. A face Jonah recognized from nightmares. You're a hard man to find, the rider said. Jonah stood in the doorway. Not hard enough, apparently. They want you, the rider said. The ash vultures. They know you've got something they want. Jonah didn't flinch. What's that? The rider smiled like he'd tasted blood. A second chance. He turned, mounted, and galloped off without another word. That night, the wind howled louder than before. The girls sat inside, close together, eyes on Jonah as he stood by the window. He stared out at the road, knowing it would soon darken with hooves and fire. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel like running. They were coming, and this time, he'd be ready. The earth trembled softly beneath their feet, before the hooves ever touched the ridge. Jonah stood at the edge of the field as the sky began to burn with the colors of dusk. He held the old revolver in his hand, once twisted and blackened from fire, now restored, each part cleaned, oiled, brought back from the edge like the man who gripped it. The weight in his palm felt familiar, like it had never left him. He hadn't drawn a weapon in over a decade, but his hand still remembered. His breath was steady, his eyes sharp. Behind him, the girls moved like clockwork. The barn had become a fortress, ropes strung to trip hooves, buckets hanging from rafters, nails buried in the dust just deep enough to catch a careless boot. Barrels had been filled with water in case of fire, and stacks of flour sacks, reinforced with stone, stood like bunkers along the porch. Nora climbed the old windmill tower with the mirror Jonah had shown her how to angle. From up there, she could signal. From up there, she could see them coming. Sarah, tiny and clever, stood beside the goat pen, her arms behind her back, rehearsing the part she would play. The other girls waited in hidden spots, behind troughs, under hay bales, armed with slingshots and whatever courage their small hearts could carry. Jonah had trained them not in violence, but in survival. He adjusted his hat, squinting toward the mesa. The ash vultures would come at sundown. Always did. Like wolves hunting just when the light was weakest. When the sound finally came, hoofbeats, low and rhythmic like war drums, he didn't flinch. They came in a cloud of dust, 10 of them, their silhouettes sharp against the dying light. At their head rode Malachi Crow, tall, scarred, still wrapped in that duster Jonah remembered from so long ago. The man hadn't aged, not in his eyes, just hardened. They rode up to the gate slow, savoring the moment. Malachi stopped at the split-rail fence, his voice smooth as snake oil. "Jonah Vane," he said, "you really did crawl out of that hole." Jonah stepped forward, not hiding behind a wall, not raising his gun. "You've aged," Malachi added, grinning. Jonah met his eyes. "So has my patience." There was a beat of silence, broken only by the creak of leather and the desert wind. Malachi's smile twisted. "You always were full of riddles." He raised a hand. Jonah's signal mirror flashed once from the windmill. Then the ranch came alive. Ropes snapped tight under the hooves of 2 riders, sending them crashing to the dust. One reached for his gun and yelped. Handful of nails. From the barn's loft, Nora's signal light blinded another, and a slingshot cracked against his temple. Buckets of water poured from above as torches were knocked loose, fire and smoke scattering the horses. Jonah moved like lightning. He dropped to one knee and fired twice, clean and sharp. Not to kill, but to disable, to warn. His aim struck saddles, shot pistols from hands. He wasn't the man who'd vanished after Red Rock. He was sharper, calmer, unforgiving. Malachi drew, but Jonah was already in motion, flanking toward the barn. 2 riders peeled off, chasing a flash of movement, Sarah running like a wraith behind the goat pen. She stopped, turned, and yelled. They followed, laughing. The goats weren't laughing. Sarah darted through the pen gate and slipped behind a haystack. The 2 riders barreled in after her and triggered the tripwire. The pen gate slammed shut behind them. The goats, startled and territorial, charged. Screams followed. Back in the yard, one outlaw made it to the porch steps before slipping on spilled flour and slamming into the post. He staggered to rise, but 2 girls tackled him from behind, tying his hands with rope they'd soaked in syrup and ash. It stuck like tar. Jonah watched it unfold with grim precision. They were kids, but they were fighters, survivors, smart, and they were buying him the time he needed. Then the barn ignited. Malachi had circled behind, torch in hand. Flames licked the dry wood fast, swallowing the loft in seconds. The fire reached high, orange and furious against the darkening sky. Jonah ran. He found Malachi inside, just as the flames touched the rafters. Always said you'd burn for what you did, Malachi snarled, pistol in hand. Jonah didn't answer. He just stepped forward, the firelight dancing off his revolver. Malachi fired first. The shot went wide. Jonah's came next, clean and sharp. It hit Malachi's shoulder, sending him spinning. The outlaw dropped his pistol with a cry and fell against a beam. The barn groaned above them. Nora appeared in the smoke, coughing, a wet cloth over her face. We have to go. Jonah moved toward Malachi, who was slumped and cursing. You gonna finish it? Malachi hissed. Jonah stared at him a long time. No, he said. I've taken enough lives. He grabbed Malachi by the collar and hauled him toward the door. They made it out just before the roof caved in. By morning, the ash vultures were in custody, roped and marched into town behind a borrowed wagon. The sheriff hadn't seen Jonah Vane in years. Didn't say a word when he handed Malachi over. Just tipped his hat and nodded. Jonah returned to the ranch with soot on his hands and a hollow exhaustion deep in his bones. The girls greeted him with hugs, cheers, and a breakfast they tried to cook. It was terrible, but he ate every bite. Weeks passed. The garden bloomed. The barn rebuilt stronger. Jonah built beds in the house, 10 of them, carved with care. The laughter didn't just echo anymore. It lived there. At town hall, folks gathered one afternoon to hear about what had happened. Jonah stood on the steps, awkward in a borrowed coat, girls flanking him, like stars around a mountain. They saved me, he said simply, long before I saved them. There were tears in the crowd. Applause. For the first time in a long while, Jonah Vane was not a ghost. He was a neighbor. Then came the letter, delivered by courier, sealed with the red wax of the U.S. Marshal's office. They'd heard of what he did. They wanted him, not as a gun, but as a mentor, a trainer, a guardian of the frontier. Jonah read the letter twice. Then he looked at the 10 girls playing in the yard, chasing goats, climbing fences, laughing. He folded the letter into his coat. There was time. Time to teach them how to ride, how to shoot straight, but only when justice demanded it. Time to pass on more than survival. A legacy, carved not from violence, but from hope. 10 daughters of the dust. And 1 man reborn,